Hello, I'm Kelly Kuo, Artistic Director and Conductor of Oregon Mozart Players. In this episode of Keynotes, I'll be introducing you to the composers and pieces on our next on-demand video of a program I've entitled She Says. As the title suggests, the program is a celebration of women and the musical lens through which they view the world. March is Women's History Month, and the world observed International Women's Day on March 8th. Around the same time, this country was also flooded with the presence of an irresistible and addictive gift from the fairer sex, Girl Scout cookies. That gave me the idea of comparing each of the three pieces on our program to my favorite kinds of these tasty treats. My choices may be controversial, but hopefully that's limited to the cookies and not the repertoire. Our first featured composer is the acclaimed violinist, composer, and educator, Jessie Montgomery. Born and raised in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, her works are already performed frequently around the world by leading musicians and ensembles. For the past 2 decades, she has been affiliated with the Sphinx organization, which supports young African American and Latinx string players, and she currently serves as composer in residence for the Sphinx Virtuosi, the organization's flagship professional touring ensemble. Let's listen to a little of the title track of Montgomery's album, Strum. Obviously engaging to the ear, Montgomery's music has been called turbulent, wildly colorful, and exploding with life. This aptly describes the music that is Starburst, the short work that opens our program. Inspired by the rapid formation of large numbers of new stars in a galaxy, the music of Starburst is filled with rapidly changing musical colors. Explosive gestures coexist with gentle melodies to produce a multidimensional landscape. So, what kind of Girl Scout cookie resonates with this description? Samoas, my favorite of all Girl Scout cookies. Samoas are coconutty, caramelly, dark chocolatey discs of heaven with layers of contrasting textures and vibrant colors. The fresh taste explodes the moment you pop it into your mouth and renders you speechless with sheer joy. So let's listen to the Samoa of this program. Throughout the history of classical music, there are examples of composers who overcame barriers created by the prevailing attitudes of the time toward women. Jessie Montgomery is a prime example of a female composer who has not waited for the approval of the gatekeepers of classical music to make her presence known. I'd like to next introduce you to another example from the 19th century, Emily Meyer. I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say that Emily Meyer's name is not recognizable by the large majority of professional musicians today. Yet, she was the most prolific and famous German woman composer of the Romantic period, whose works covered the entire spectrum of musical structures and instrumentation. How does someone who received so much critical and popular acclaim for her compositions fall into such obscurity for well over 100 years? The third of 5 children and eldest daughter of a very successful pharmacist, Meyer received music education via piano and organ lessons at an early age, though there was no musical tradition within her family. When she was 7 years old, she apparently interpreted her musical assignments with so much liberty that her teacher suggested that if she was going to do that, then she might as well make up her own songs. Her mother died when Meyer was very young, but the major turning point in her life occurred at the age of 28, when her father committed suicide on the anniversary of her mother's burial. The death of her father caused deep grief, but it also presumably left her independently wealthy because a year later she moved to what was then Stettin, Germany to bury herself in music studies and work. In Stettin, Meyer studied composition with Karl Löw, who famously told his talented young protege, "You actually know nothing and everything at the same time." When she asked whether she could share the lessons with other female students, he answered, "Such a God-given talent as hers had not been bestowed upon any other person he knew." After moving to Berlin in 1847 to continue her studies in composition and orchestration, she lived alone in a flat and never married, making her quite the anomaly for a woman in her era. Thanks to her independent wealth, she had the means and opportunity to compose and travel with her brothers throughout Europe in an effort to get her music performed and published. Most importantly, she was able to consistently access full professional orchestras to perform her work, which is almost unprecedented for a woman at that time. During her career, she produced 8 symphonies, at least 15 overtures, dozens of chamber works, solo piano compositions, and lieder, even leading to her being dubbed Der weibliche Beethoven, or the female Beethoven. Like Beethoven, Meyer's earlier works were highly influenced by classical Viennese style, but eventually developed a unique compositional voice that displayed strong Romantic-era tendencies. Let's listen to the beginning of her Symphony No. 4, which is bold, confident, rhythmically complex, yet full of beautiful, long, expressive melodies. The passion and drama in her music is clearly apparent in this excerpt, and is, from my point of view, as good as much of the music by male composers that is still in the mainstream repertoire today. So it is a real puzzle why she was largely forced to self-publish, and why most of her music exists today only in handwritten manuscript form in the Berlin State Library. There are references to the deterioration of her financial affairs later in her life, but could it really be that this glass ceiling was only able to be broken because of money? Fortunately, thanks to the hard work today of musicians and musicologists giving voice to female composers, her work is beginning to resurface. Organizations are putting in the painstaking work to digitally engrave her scores, and we are starting to see her work being recorded and made available to the public. My introduction to Meyer's work came through rabbit holes I followed after searching for a 19th century work for strings of substantial length written by a woman. This was to replace Louis Ferenc's Symphony No. 3, which unfortunately had to be reprogrammed due to the state's pandemic mandates. I was unable to find a single work in publication that fit this description, so I decided to make my own by arranging Emily Meyer's string quartet in G minor. Because Meyer's work is now completely in the public domain and out of bounds of copyright, it seemed like an ideal project for OMP. The first of the 7 string quartets that she composed, Meyer's Opus 14, is reminiscent of more frequently performed works by her male contemporaries Felix Mendelssohn and Robert Schumann, but also captures a unique quality. My arrangement of this quartet is not just the simple addition of a bass part to double the cello part every now and then. It takes a largely first violin-dominated work and shares the musical lines between both violin sections, offers chances for the principals to take solo turns in various passages, and also gives the bass line occasional independence from the cello part. This performance will be the premiere of my arrangement, and I can't wait to share the music of Emily Meyer in this way. I hope you'll agree after hearing it that her music deserves to be programmed far more frequently. It is worth noting that this is exactly how I feel about these Girl Scout cookies. These crispy vanilla cookies, layered with gobs of peanut butter and covered with a delicious chocolate coating, are really good. But they don't get nearly the publicity as Samoa's or Thin Mints. The the cookie that I happen to associate with the featured concerto on this program. We already know much about the life of Franz Joseph Haydn and his appointment as music director of the Esterházy court due to the popularity of his symphonies, chamber works, solo piano works, and cello concertos. But more recently, his violin concertos have drawn attention, and it is Haydn's first violin concerto in C major that will be performed on this program. It turns out that his 4 violin concertos were all written during Haydn's first years at Esterházy. The C major concerto was composed around the early 1760s for the orchestra's concertmaster Luigi Tommasini. It was also one of the few works whose manuscript survived a fire at Eisenstadt in 1768. Tommasini was a brilliant soloist, and this concerto exploits many of his skills by incorporating several technical challenges. 1. Double stops, which is playing 2 notes simultaneously. 2. Wide leaps. And 3. Singing melodies that could be freely ornamented in the Italian style. The structure is that of a standard classical concerto, so fast, slow, fast, but the musical language is more Baroque than classical. Listen in particular for the stunning slow movement, which is like a romantic Italian serenade accompanied by a simple pizzicato. Here is American violinist Gil Shaham to show a little bit of this movement. Thin Mints are the most popular Girl Scout cookie due to their perfect ratio of mint to dark chocolate, as well as a great crunch and flakiness factor. Like Thin Mints, you can't really go wrong with having Haydn's music at the table. For this concerto, I'm excited to bring back to Eugene the brilliant violinist Chee-Yun. A well-seasoned performer who has already toured the world multiple times soloing with the most well-known orchestras, Chee-Yun's reputation as a passionate performer are well-known in the industry. If you aren't familiar with the brilliant playing of Chee-Yun, I'll leave you with a little excerpt of her playing the ending of Saint-Saëns' introduction and Rondo Capriccioso. And I hope you enjoy the concert.